Hey, it's PJ from Prey vs. Predator, the podcast. Last week, I explored episode 1 of Bad Vegan, which is a documentary about vegan chef Sarma and the beginning of her relationship with her predator, Mr. Fox. Just a reminder that there will be many spoilers here, so if you haven't watched the show, please watch that, and then you can feel free to refer back to this video. So although we learn through the series that Mr. Fox goes by a number of different names, for the sake of clarity and because I just really like calling him by his initials MF, I will stick to calling him Mr. Fox or MF for the rest of this episode for sure. At this point, Sarma and MF are married, and he now, through the use of his IT person, has convinced Sarma has Sarma convinced that she, for her own protection, because he's in this dark world of secret operatives and CIA special forces, that for her own protection, she needs to allow Will, the IT person, to have all of her data, passwords, banking information. She just gives up all of her privacy to Will, who, spoiler alert, we find out later is actually MF in disguise, pretending he's an IT person. So one of the things I want to point out in episode 2 is this idea of love bombing, the tremendous weaving of a story that MF comes up with to really convince Sarma that she is very special, that he has been looking for her all of his life, and that there is some magical, mystical element. We see also where her love for her dog, Leon, is also woven into this narrative in this very powerful, very romantic, sort of ethereal way. And she really is open to being loved and feeling special. And I'm not sure who out there isn't. Sometimes prey have an ability to see through other people's eyes more than their own. They almost sort of because they can tend to doubt themselves. So somebody telling them that they're special and they're wonderful and they're loved and they're valued, that can almost be more powerful for prey in particular than telling themselves that. They almost don't believe it in and of themselves. And so hearing somebody else say it and feel it and believe it, I'm sure was incredibly powerful. And she really believes his words. He calls her a tiny blonde human. This sounds so cute and so sweet. And she just says, she just loves that term of endearment. But I want to take that apart a little bit because I want to show you how the predator embeds language with predatory dynamics. When we actually replace tiny blonde human with any other word, you see you are just a woman, but that's okay. I'm very much in love with you. You see you are just a Protestant, but that's okay. I'm very much in love with you. When we replace that word that sounds kind of cute with any other word that's more neutral, it becomes more clear that embedded in this language is superiority. I see you are only this, but that's okay. I love you anyway, despite the fact that you aren't significant. So even in just this kind of cute little sweet text, we actually have a superiority being formed. And you'll see in predatory language, and we'll see this throughout the show, they are masters at embedding their language with superiority and with contempt. We see a little bit later here, she discusses that he's chosen her. She should almost feel grateful. He has presented himself as superior, as a superior being. He's also presented her as an inferior person. So this is the language that he starts to literally brainwash her with. And we'll see this repeatedly. So even as she's telling the story, you can sort of see her trying to grapple with language. At the time of this filming, I imagine that she hadn't had a ton of time to really explore what her language was for what happened to her. And you don't get a sense she has a strong sense of what she actually went through. And so it's interesting to me as somebody who not only has been through it personally many years ago, but has worked with people, to really watch her grapple to try to find her language. It's sort of wonderful to me on one hand, because part of what we do at Prey versus Predator is try to get this language into your hands and into hands of prey in particular. And the value is being able to really have a better sense of how these people, the predators, get the prey and how they control them.
He would tell me that he had tons of money and that money didn't matter. Money would never be any object. So he had me wire money to him to prove that I was committed to him and that I was able to handle these tests.
We see here that he's talking about my power, my wealth, my influence. It's all yours if you only can prove yourself to me. And, he's really demonstrated how much money he has. And he says, she says, he'd tell me that he had tons of money and he could just give me everything I wanted. Now, he has set up this perfect scenario, and in her mind, she's in love. He's proven again, time and time again, that he's CIA, Special Ops, Dark Forces. She has married him. She has given him all her passwords. She feels like she needs him for her own protection. He has assistants and drivers and an IT person, and he's offering her everything. But he's also supplanted this idea that she needs to prove that she loves him. She needs to prove that she'd be willing to give up something for him. Now, notice he hasn't done anything for her yet. He didn't get the diamond ring. He didn't get the townhouse. She hasn't seen any money other than what he has said. But because prey tend to be honest human beings, it doesn't occur to her, I'm sure, that he could even be lying. It's not even an option. Because she wouldn't do it, and because this is beyond her ability to even imagine somebody doing, she's not even able to think it. And I guess I have to prove it. So, we talked about prey being non-dominant in the first episode that we did. This again is another place where this comes into play. He wants me to do something. So that's reasonable. I can do something. He's got all this. I could at least do something. So we see, of course, one of the first things that he wants her to prove. And what we don't know is anything else that he's wanted her to prove. My guess is there's been other things that he's wanted her to prove along the way that she's done and done successfully to his liking. So one of the first things that the Netflix documentary points out, though, is that he asks her for money. It doesn't sound like it's occurring to her that when you're in a situation where somebody loves you, you don't need to prove who you are, what you are. Whether he has $1, $1 million, $100 million, she no more has to prove who she is to him than she does to her friend who's out in the streets. But because the predator has used this language and exalted himself beyond reason, she has sort of bought into the fantasy that he is who he says he is. And because it's pretty natural for prey to not see themselves as wonderful, prey do tend to be quite humble. And what there isn't is a sense of self that's strong enough to say, if you need me to prove that I love you, then we already have a problem, because we don't prove love. We experience it and we do it together. And it's not something that can be purchased or bought or proven. And so we're already on really false grounds. When we talk in the podcast about foot in the door technique, and this is one of the predators' techniques, is the more they can get you to commit to them, the more power they have over you, the deeper your relationship is. So at this point, he's got her to commit to marriage. He's got her to believe she's in danger without him. He's got her to offer him all of her privacy. So we're really seeing this, these techniques and these tools that this predator is using to really suck her in. So we're going to keep going here.
Feel like such a big amount, like that's a lot of money that I could do a lot with in my business. I could pay somebody, I could do this, I could do that. So it would frustrate me.
When she wires him all this money, around $24,000, she wires him. One of the first questions she has is, when do I get my money back? She's quite frightened because it's a lot of money and she's responsible. His response completely and utterly negates her fears, her needs, her wants. And this is another way that he is eliminating her voice and silencing her. Sarma wasn't able, even as a young child, to express her thoughts and feelings very well. And so her sister says, she would talk for her quite often. So this is that idea that prey tend to be people who, even though they're strong, their vulnerability can be really hard for them, and having needs can be really vulnerable. And so because they sort of tend to avoid vulnerability, they tend to avoid looking like they have needs. And so even as her parents got a divorce when she was a child, instead of crying, screaming, needing some comfort, she sort of listened, went to her room, took care of herself, appeared as if she had no needs. And so this is a quality that often predators really, really value in prey, because they're so quick to meet their predator's needs and they're very hesitant to ask for what they need. So we'll see as their relationship develops and continues, he starts to take over at her business. She starts taking a back role, more of a back seat, and he starts coming in and hanging around and then beginning to act like he owns the place.
But once he made his presence known in the restaurant more, I think that's when people kind of became a little more suspicious of Shane.
One of the things that we noticed by how Sarma's employees are describing MF here is they talk about him talking vaguely. One of the tools of predators that's probably one of the most powerful tools in their toolbox. So she uses the word vague. I'm going to use the word rhetoric. This MF, he speaks nonstop rhetoric. He sounds like he's saying something, but never is. And so the employees are confused why it doesn't sound like he has any background or actual knowledge in this. And yet he is telling us what to do and how to do it. And then we'll see later on that he starts asking, again, these kind of rhetorical questions like, oh, I want to run something by you and just get your opinion on something. Well, what he's doing there is essentially learning the language, learning the lingo, learning the phrasing for how to sound like he knows what he's talking about. And he's sort of picking their brains and in order to learn how to present himself in a meaningful way. And because they don't actually have to know what they're talking about, because they have this gift of rhetoric, they get away with it time and time again because nobody has that sort of sense to or strength to stand up to them and say, you don't actually know what you're talking about, do you? So another one of MF's techniques is to embed fear, not just in Sarma, but to embed fear in the employees as well. We'll see one employee here describing a day where MF shows up and he asks for employee files and he seems sort of stealth about it and the files disappear.
Shane showed up and he was asking where this box of employee files are. He found the box and took them, and I don't know what happened to the employee files. Yeah. Or why he needed them.
So if you're the employees and all your information disappears, or the boss comes in and asks for everybody's information and then it goes missing, this is an unsettling experience. But what do you say? The boss took the files? On the surface, nothing to be worried about or nothing to really be stressed about. But because it's done in a manner that's frightening, you can't really put a language to why, and nothing is really explained. And so you don't have any recourse to kind of follow up on it because nothing really happened except something did happen.
There were always these sort of weird metaphorical things, like he would call people red shirts and blue shirts. He could look at somebody and know that's a bad person or that's a good person.
again, rhetoric that means nothing. He has a rhetoric for categorizing people between himself and Sarma. So he calls people red shirts and blue shirts. And essentially he's saying that one is good, one is bad, one is trustworthy, one is not trustworthy. It's like he has some inner knowledge. It's like he has some vocabulary or some insight into who's good and who's bad. It's also a method of Sarma's not going to be able to prove whether he's right or wrong. It's rhetoric. That's a blue shirt. He's good. That's a red shirt. He's bad. What are you going to say? So for her, it's an impossible position. It's the power of rhetoric is sort of impossible to make sense of, and it's impossible to fight against. In this case, I would suggest the intent is to draw a wedge between her and her people. Her people are fiercely loyal to her. And you can see they've talked about being uncomfortable when he's there, trying to avoid having his table. And now he's trying to further deepen that wedge by just creating animosity between red shirts, blue shirts, and pointing out who's good, who's bad to her. Just amazing predatory tools here. We could spend hours, but we need to keep going. So
he would say that he suddenly needed 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. And for me, that would feel like such a big amount.
We're at the point where he's just asking more and more and more money from her. And this is money that she says she could do a lot with in her business. And as she's getting more and more nervous about giving more and more money, he really starts to mock her. He starts to devalue. He discounts what she says. He discounts how she feels. So when she starts wanting the money back, he starts saying things like, "You are back to valuing money over me." And here again, we're into this rhetoric zone where you're back to valuing money over me. That sounds really bad. And who loves somebody wants to value money over the person? Nobody wants to be that person. Nobody wants their partner to view them as that person. But this is where that sense of self comes into play, and her trust in him over her own judgment. But what there isn't is sort of this insight that this is not about her valuing money over her relationship. This is about her offering money relentlessly to her partner showing no indication and no respect for her need to know where it's going, what's being done with it, where it is. She's sacrificing her financial future. She's sacrificing her business. She's sacrificing her company's future in order to please him and prove her love to him. And all he says to her is she's a bad person who's valuing money over him. So you see how the reality gets flipped in a way where he makes her the bad person, the persecutor, and he becomes a victim. And the one that is the morally superior. So because she doesn't have a handbook on how predators work, she doesn't understand this dynamic herself. And so she does everything she can to continue to prove her love. So we're going to look at this idea of flying monkeys. They are individuals that either the person creates or that they actually have, that they can impact and influence by telling them lies, by telling them dynamics that aren't true, and just by manipulating their belief systems.
This mysterious brother.
His brother could see anywhere and everywhere.
So one of the things he's doing in this scene is he is setting up a situation where he uses his brother as the flying monkey. So if you don't do this, these people will kill me. And when she tries to say no, and you hear her saying, no, no, no. Of course, there is no respect for her no. There's not even an engagement with her no. He flips her no as oh, you will do this or I die. So you will be responsible for the death of your husband if you don't do what I'm telling you to do when I tell you to do it.
He'd rather keep you shielded from it all and let you think he's an asshole. Some would think that noble.
In this clip, this idea of flying monkeys comes into play where MF is using this pretend IT person to say that MF is away on a trip and he on a mission and he's just in peril. Try to understand. He doesn't care if you hate him. He'd rather keep you shielded from it all and let you think he's an asshole than risk you taking heat. Some would think that's noble. And again, on the surface, if you really did believe that your partner was in this, very dangerous place and that you were kind of, complaining or asking questions, you might feel kind of bad about the situation. And if you look again at his language, though, the language is embedded with superiority and contempt. He's doing something noble. All you can do is bitch about things that are meaningless. So the things that are meaningless are equated with everything important to her. She says at one point, what's important to her is needing to know where things are, what's going on, what comes next. And all of those things she keeps being told are just meaningless, unimportant, valueless. And what is important is what MF is doing, what he's thinking, what he's needing. And so we've got this quite powerful situation where your job as prey is to meet the needs of the predator. Your needs don't count. So with the prey personalities, again, we're talking about non-dominance, very empathetic, and a very natural kind of humility where if you need something, I want to give it to you. We've seen in Sarma that there's this incredible generosity, kindness, empatheticness, and to imagine that she would hold her ground and as a result, somebody that she loved would get hurt. That would be a lot to bear for the rest of her life. She would have to be so powerfully sure of herself, or she would have to have a language for the dynamic she was in, and she didn't have either. We're looking at a place here now where what he promises her is that he's going to give her a cash allowance of $100,000 a month forever. And what he set up is he knows where she is all the time. He's all powerful. He's watching everything that she does. And in order to get everything you want in life, you have to be obedient to me, he says, right? So obedience is the difference between losing everything, your husband, your money, living forever with your dog. You're going to have to give up everything, or you can get it all, but the difference is going to be obedience. So really, again, this brainwashing of obedience to me is what has to happen in order for you to get out of this situation and in order to get into the situation you want. Both ends of that spectrum require obedience to him. And now she's at a space where she's incredibly frightened. He seems to know everywhere she is all the time, what's going on in her life, who's emailing her. He knows it all and he's promising it all. So this is a way where her kindness and her empathy in the hands of the predator, they are tools which get warped around this kind of evil genius, and they get used against her as a weapon.
What do I always say? What's my brother's main thing? That she says she's out for herself. There's no risk here.
Oh, I'm out for myself.
I'm not scolding you.
Here we're going to explore gaslighting and flying monkeys all combined into one wonderful moment. So he talks about family members, and he's saying that the family members doubt her, the family members want her to have to prove herself. And so these people that don't exist, he's using them as people who agree with him or that, it's us against you. There's, you're much more likely to doubt yourself when, all hands go up in the room and your hand doesn't go up. That's an awkward situation. And so the predator uses this flying monkey technique in order to pressure you to agree, pressure you to think you're all by yourself and only you think this. Everybody else thinks that. So here he says, this is supposed to make you doubt. All these things I'm asking you to do are designed to make you give up. Designed to make you betray me. And so while he's putting her in a situation where she's sacrificing, again, she is the one sacrificing all of the money. She is sacrificing her time, her brand, her image. 100% of the sacrifice is from her. And then he says, I'm the one that would get gutted, not you. So in this moment, he places himself as the victim and he places her as a persecutor. She's responsible for him getting hurt. What he's doing to her, he's accusing her of having the potential of doing to him. So that's a great example of gaslighting.
When I met Anthony in 2013, I was a bartender at the place.
So we're going to fast forward a little bit here and look at, there's another character introduced called Naz. And Naz is essentially a bartender that was really drawn into also the predator web. On screen, he appears to be really quite a nice guy. And Naz tells a story about if he ever challenged MF in any kind of way, that MF's response, how he got out of getting challenged, is to get very angry, and then he would accuse Naz of not listening. So rage is really frightening to people, and for kind, nice, warm, loving, relationship-oriented prey, anger and rage really backs you down, and it makes a lot of people go into this sort of appeasing the person in the rage because it's frightening. And so you back down. And so when their partner responds with anything other than warmth or kindness, it's very easy for them to get shut down. We see her trying to defend herself. We see her holding her own. You're being an asshole. You're taking my money. I'm giving you everything. And if you listen to his responses, they get increasingly agitated and contemptuous.
What changed? You've never cared about the money in the past.
No, I have.
We got over that hurdle. Who gives a fuck? I tell you to send a wire, you send a wire. That's it.
You never cared about money in the past. Now you're a money lover. And then what changed? You're different. You changed.
Your fucking Jeffrey debt can be bought in 5 fucking minutes.
Then do it.
If I have been rude or something, maybe I handled it too much like a soldier and a general or something, I'll apologize.
There's this great moment where he says, if I have been rude or something and you're upset with me, I'll apologize. What's funny to me is there is no apology. It sounds a little bit like an apology, but when you actually see what he's saying and really listen, he said, if I've been rude or something, which, clearly in his mind he hasn't, and you're upset with me, which she clearly is, I will apologize. That's different than saying, I am apologizing, or I am sorry, or I did do these things. And I love that little bit, like, maybe I've handled it like a soldier because he's just so awesome and he's so cool and he's just, such a hero. And so, if he's handled it that way, then he will apologize. He just never does.
We've had this talk. Yeah, your money, your fucking $1 million? Ooh, that's a lot of fucking money.
So now we have contempt, we have disrespect, and we have a sense of, this to you is important. This is nothing. This is a lot of money for her, and there is zero respect for it. This is where the prey, if they are really grasping a language for what's going on, they can know what I want and what I need and what's important to me is completely and utterly irrelevant to my partner, to the point where they will mock it. This is her partner, people. This is her husband. He has promised her the world, and she's trying desperately to hold her own. It is beyond her ability to comprehend, to imagine that her husband is doing this to mess with her mind and create a situation where she feels insane. That's why I'm doing this video. When you have a brain of somebody who's loving and kind and warm, that somebody would and could do this is not in your wheelhouse. Almost at the end, we see her write in her journal, please let this be over. There's just such a profound helplessness to the energy to this statement. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to get out. He's talking about, we're just so close. We're at the 2-yard line. Don't screw it up now. And at this point, according to the narrative of Netflix, essentially she's given him about $1.7 million. If you're not all in at that point, I don't know what point you would be all in. So you're married. This is your person. You're trying to hold your own, but you can't. There's just too much coming at you at one time. If her brain let her at this point imagine that he's a fraud, I don't imagine that her brain at this point is even going to let her believe that or imagine that. Later on, we'll see she starts to imagine that this could be possible. But the helplessness of the statement is what sticks out to me. And this is somebody who started off quite strong. He essentially has taken everything from her, except she still has this one little source of her dog and a promise from him that all this badness will go away if she just sticks in. And that essentially wraps up episode 2. And so thanks for watching this. I hope that we've seen some really powerful dynamics to watch for, to look for, to talk about. We really want this to be a discussion and something that we share with people so that we get this out there into the hands of prey who desperately need it. And people who are in it need to have a language for it, and people who are not in it need to have a language how to avoid it. So let's share it. Let's talk about it. Let's start the conversation. Next week, we'll do episode 3. We'll see you back here. Thanks for joining me.